Welcome to another video in my Transparent series, where I help you guide your child to make the most informed decisions for their gender questioning from a critical thinking and empathetic perspective. My name is Artemis, and whether this is your first video or you're returning, welcome to all. As a disclaimer, I'm a biological female who medically transitioned in my 30s, and I aim to bring my experience and knowledge of the available science on the topic to help avoid irreversible damage to all who explore here. If you're listening to this video, it's likely that your child has mentioned to you that they're transgender. It may be the first time you're hearing this label, or perhaps you've been exposed to it in some fashion and your emotional response will vary. Regardless, part of being able to help your child with this exploration of self is being informed about the phenomena of transgenderism in as balanced and objective way as possible. The majority of children claiming they're transgender, statistically 99%, will not need any medical intervention such as hormones or surgery. The information in this video will still be helpful to you in being able to assist your child as an informed guardian. In the 1% chance that you do have a child who will end up pursuing medical treatments when of legal age, if you wish to maintain a good relationship with them once they leave the nest, this information will help you better understand their view. In this video, I'm going to focus on attempting to define words that are typically used in describing the experience of gender and in questioning this part of oneself for two reasons. One, even amongst professionals, there is inconsistency surrounding definitions, making it even harder to communicate an already complex topic. While I will give you what I have come to see as making sense and logic out of the terms, it will be important to be aware of that trouble anytime you read information about it. And for number two, in order to help your child build a framework of identity of their own, you'll need to have a clear understanding of concepts with which to provide a stable foundation for them. Otherwise, they risk coming to conclusions based on faulty logic, and sometimes decisions made from here are irreversibly damaging. With those points in mind, let's start with the words sex and gender. It doesn't help that for years many were taught that sex and gender were the same thing, but it's becoming increasingly more helpful to consider them two separate things. Sex refers to whether you produce sperm or eggs as your reproductive potential, and typically this is associated with having a penis or a vagina, respectively. There are atypical sex conditions where people do not follow the norm, and this is one starting point for where many arguments about transgender individuals are made, perhaps a topic for a different video. Gender typically refers to characteristics that one possesses which are either masculine or feminine in nature. So, when you think about categories of sex, think of either male or female, and when you think about gender, it may be helpful to think about the terms masculine and feminine. These characteristics, either masculine or feminine, can be social in nature, such as whether you tend to be empathetic or not. They can be cultural in nature, such as what type of clothing or hairstyle you prefer, and can also be biological in nature, such as whether or not you have a robust jawline. Keep in mind that everyone has features of masculinity and femininity within them, regardless of their sex. For example, a female can have a robust jaw, and a male can keep long hair. It's safe to say that gender has more sides to it than sex, and perhaps is why it tends to be more complicated for one to navigate when thinking about their identity. However, there are still only two sexes, male and female, and two genders, masculine and feminine, at least when using the definitions that I've provided. There are intersex conditions which allow for a combination of male and female reproductive characteristics within one person, but there are still only two categories to choose from. While many try to argue that there are multiple genders, what they most likely mean is that there are many different gender expressions. In fact, the number of combinations of gender expression is infinite, but still from only two categories of masculine and feminine. In general, the important point to understand for our next term to define is that we have certain expectations of how males and females should look and act, and we generally associate males with masculinity and females with femininity. With that foundation, we can try to define the word transgender. In popular culture, people have used this term to define a great range of identities, and so for quite some time now, it's been seen as an umbrella term, a catch-all to describe experiences that are not just simple stereotypes of what we expect men and women to be. And if you think about it, though, that concept that we do not all fit into neat little boxes has been around for quite some time, and in itself is quite normal in our exploration of self. The prefix trans simply means across from or to go beyond. Since we've already defined gender, and knowing that we associate males with masculinity and females with femininity, then the literal definition of the word transgender should be beyond or across from traditional gender associations. Put differently, if someone looks opposite of what we expect for a gender aligned with their sex, they are technically transgender. Under this definition, a tomboy female or a pretty boy male would qualify as a transgender person, even though at current we might not say this. As an important side note, you may be watching this video series because today, when someone says they are transgender, there seems to be a rush to medically treat this individual with hormones and surgeries, which concerns you. If we thought about most of these claims of being transgender like the experience of being a tomboy or a pretty boy, we might see this as a terrible use of so-called medicine. And I do believe that it is. We know that genuinely there exist individuals who benefit overall positively from medical intervention for gender discrepancies. However, the goal here is to prevent children from experiencing irreversible damage from inappropriate medicalization, while still allowing treatment to those who benefit as informed and consenting individuals. There is another term that is widely used by individuals under this transgender umbrella, called non-binary. The term is said to describe feeling neither male nor female. It does not take into account factual biology, and instead addresses only the feelings of each individual person. This is highly subjective, aka unique to each person who uses it, and can be coming from any number of personal justifications for the claim. In another video on this playlist, I will address potential reasons for someone, typically minor-aged people, for claiming they are transgender or non-binary, and those reasons do not require medical intervention. They may, however, need talk therapy. Sometimes these two terms are used interchangeably, but the bottom line is that often they are used to describe gender non-conforming behavior or characteristics in a variety of ways, or a wish to detach oneself from whatever they believe is associated with their natal sex. It's important now to talk about something called gender dysphoria. In a textbook used by mental health professionals called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the term is defined as having distress about what gender one was born, as well as their gender expression, and wishing to change sexual features to match how the person feels or wants to be seen. This interchangeable use of sex and gender makes comprehending this topic much more difficult, and in my opinion really should be addressed by the professionals who write it. As we have defined gender earlier, one is not born with a gender. Some of their physical features are gendered, but the rest, the cultural and social contexts, are learned later in life, as it is a complex combination of masculine and feminine traits. One is born with a sex, and for less than 1% of the population, the distress about being that sex is so severe and pervasive from early childhood that they pursue cross-sex hormones and surgeries as early as allowed to alleviate their symptoms, to which there is success. These two facts, severe feeling of being the wrong sex to the point of impairment, and lengthy persistence of feelings, are what qualify for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, formally. These individuals may also say that they feel they have been born in the wrong body. For the term to be called gender dysphoria, though, with how we have defined gender earlier, a much larger percentage of adolescents will experience this. They may be very uncomfortable with changes from puberty, or the expectations they see typical of their sex within society. Their experience, however normal for teenagers, is not the same as the individuals who suffer from early onset and long-term gender dysphoria, even if on the surface in some ways it can be difficult to tell them apart. The dangerous part here is that while there is 1% of the population who will benefit greatly from medicalization for this diagnostic and statistical manual term, the other 99%, or some large portion of that, may experience these feelings as they are currently defined and not need any medical intervention at all. In the current social and medical environment, these individuals are wrongly being led down the path of irreversible medical interventions. I propose it better to think of the 1% as suffering from natal sex dysphoria, and the rest of the adolescents having a difficult time with puberty or other trauma related to sex can be termed a different type of mental health trouble, requiring a talk therapy approach instead. As a further note, in an effort to distinguish themselves, adult individuals who need medical intervention for their so-called gender dysphoria, the 1%, have been using the term transsexual, or may call themselves true trans, to refer to the true transsexual and not true transgender. For them, it means that they have made changes to their primary and secondary sex characteristics through hormones and surgery in order to look more like the sex they feel. Remember, trans meaning across from, and primary sex meaning genitals and other secondary characteristics like breasts or lack thereof. They aim to be across from what sex they were born. As an important clarification about these individuals, many of them are very aware of the reality of the sex they were born and do not believe that they can become the opposite sex through any interventions. Their choice to pursue cross-sex hormones and surgery are all about becoming as visually close to the sex that they feel they should have been from birth. The mechanism behind these feelings is not quite understood yet, but what is known is that while on cross-sex hormones they achieve relief, and this deep-seated feeling is typically present long before puberty. Both features generally absent in adolescents who develop rapid onset gender dysphoria, or ROGD. Now that you're familiar with gender dysphoria, let's talk about ROGD. ROGD, at least at the time of this writing, seems to be a phenomenon where adolescents suddenly develop discomfort around their natal sex and the gender associations with it. As far as is known, this is not a new condition of sexual impairment, but instead what has been referred to as a social contagion. It generally occurs amongst teenage females, though is known to affect males, and can affect large portions of a female's social circle, hence the name social contagion. Due to the typical socialization patterns of females, the easily accessible online information, the typically awkwardness of puberty, and the lack of guidance on the difficulty of just growing up, we have now coined the term ROGD to describe an outcome from these factors that we are seeing. This does not mean that your child can catch transsexualism just by social contact. It simply means that these ideas of supposedly being able to change your sex or delay it with puberty blockers are highly appealing to a developing person who is uncomfortable with such changes. Medicalization is now being used to treat what used to be a fairly normal part of growing up that a child would eventually resolve, leading to serious harm. Within the sexuality and gender atypical community, sometimes referred to as the LGBT in some form, there have been offered dozens of different terms to describe sexualities and identities. You may hear your child use terms like pansexual, demi-boy or girl, demisexual, stud, and on and on. The essence of the communication is trying to describe who they are attracted to or how they see themselves in relationship with others. You may consider them like fads in our attempts at discovering who they are. However, these terms are relating to sex and sexuality, not just fashion choices, and so it may be very necessary to approach your child with a talk about how to stay sexually safe. This will be entirely up to your philosophy on the matter, though I would suggest to make it as objective and balanced as possible. Leaning heavily on scare tactics or being too casual will each have their own consequences and are dependent on your child's individual learning style, temperament, and character. While there are any number of potential reasons for sex and sexuality to now be more openly discussed among recently pubescent-aged youth, the fact is that puberty begins for many females as early as 10 years, slightly later for males. Perhaps now, more than ever, more careful communication, support, and introduction of self-regulating skills are crucial to their safety when this maturation begins versus withholding information for a later date deemed more age appropriate. Now that you have a foundational understanding of terms, you must also have a solid personal emotional foundation within yourself to be the stable guidance your child needs as they explore themselves. The prefrontal cortex of your brain, responsible for reasoning and risk assessment, doesn't fully develop until one's mid-20s. Your children need your ability to evaluate risks and reason with choices to act as the anchor for their self-exploration. They will not be encouraged to lean on you, however, if they sense that you have emotional instability, as they will not feel safe enough to trust in your guidance. As mentioned in the first video of this series, if you are communicating worry, doubt, outrage, judgment, etc., a child may either feel that something is wrong with them to cause those emotions within you, or they may just resent how your unloading of emotions makes them feel when they come to you for help. In either case, it damages trust and prohibits further communication. The relationship to your child is evolving, and at this stage, if you don't have strong emotional regulation skills and the ability to check yourself, the relationship suffers and communication on these self-development topics becomes strained or impossible. In the next video, I will be giving some pointers on how to become more emotionally self-regulated and referring you to a wealth of resources to continue to develop these skills. Not only will they help you with your child, but they will likely improve all of your other relationships as well.